So in the last presentation, we looked at the placenta, the structure of the placenta, the role of the placenta, and this idea of structure being related to function during the course of the fetal development in the womb. So this is the diagram that I want us to look at, which leads us to the next point on the next syllabus statement. We've got the placenta here, and what you'll notice that within the uterus, the baby is now fully developed and the head is pointing downwards. So what often happens and what you would like to happen for a natural pregnancy to take place is for the baby to move into this position, which is said to be engaged. If the baby doesn't move into this position, then very often the medical profession will try and manipulate it to get the baby into that position. Because when the baby's in this position, okay, and pushing against the cervix, we get a series of events that take place, which is involving oxytocin and positive feedback, which are the principal driving force of the process of labor. It's not the only hormone involved, but this is the principal hormone that's involved in labor. So what we can see here is the head of the baby pushing against the cervix. The stretch receptors in the cervix then are going to be receiving that, and they're going to send impulses to the brain. The part of the brain that we're interested in is the pituitary gland again, and the pituitary gland in response is going to produce this hormone called oxytocin. Oxytocin is carried in the blood, and its target is the muscular wall of the uterus, the myometrium. And when oxytocin binds to the myometrium, it's going to cause uterine contractions. And the contractions of the uterus are going to mean that the baby is further pushed hard against the cervix, which means that you get more nerve impulses to the brain, more oxytocin, more contractions. So we've got positive feedback loop that's been involved in there. So oxytocin is the principal one, but it's not the only hormone involved. And this diagram, which comes from BioNinja, summarizes what's going on. So we've got this idea that the pituitary gland making oxytocin is promoting the uterine contractions here. What I also want to draw your attention to is that during pregnancy, progesterone levels remain high. We want progesterone levels to remain high because we don't want to have the breakdown of the endometrium and to have a miscarriage. And one of the things that progesterone does, which we haven't yet mentioned, is that it prevents uterine contractions. Because again, if you have contractions of the uterus during the period of time where the baby is developing, then that can dislodge the endometrium and it can cause a miscarriage. So during pregnancy, progesterone levels are high. Towards the end of the third trimester, progesterone levels will decrease. And because progesterone levels decrease, you remove the inhibition which is placed on uterine contractions. That means that you've got both oxytocin being released, which causes that, plus the inhibition being lost that allows this to take place. Another thing that takes place is that during the end of pregnancy, estrogen levels will increase slightly. And when the estrogen levels increase slightly, what that will do is it will encourage the promotion of oxytocin. It also makes the uterus more sensitive to oxytocin, which means that we've got those uterine contractions and the process of labor. And the last thing to note is that the fetus at full term, when it's pushed into this position, is going to be so-called stressed. And under that stress, it's going to produce chemicals called prostaglandins, and those prostaglandins are going to circulate to the wall of the uterus, the muscle wall, which also is going to encourage and promote contractions. So we've got the action of oxytocin directly, the removal of inhibition of muscular contraction by progesterone, the added effect of estrogen promoting the role of oxytocin, as well as the role of the prostaglandins here. So if you look at this slide, I've put down some key points that hopefully will be useful for you to make notes with. And again, here, there's also the same ideas coming across, slightly different text and slightly different images to embed that. The very last syllabus statement for us to look at is this one. And what we need to appreciate is that the human gestation period is here, so around about 9 months. And what happens as we've got different species being shown by each of the points here is that as you increase the body mass of a mammal, you generally tend to increase the gestation period of the of the organism. Just draw attention to the fact that this is a logarithmic scale here. So in general, the larger the animal, the greater the gestation period. But just to bear in mind that there are outliers, and there are some organisms which don't correlate to that, which is why this is not a directly straight line here. Two terms for us to appreciate, which are in addition on this slide, but this is possibly something that could come across as a data analysis question, but it's just asking you to think of this idea of correlation, and remember that correlation is not causation, and that is 11.4.